Tonight on KQED Newsroom, from healthcare to civil rights, Democratic presidential hopefuls got to make their pitches on the debate stage. Also, shocking detention conditions for migrant children emerge as appeals for billions of dollars in humanitarian aid at the border divide Democrats. And the Supreme Court ends its term. We'll look at how its key rulings this week could affect California. Hello and welcome to KQED Newsroom. I'm Marisa Lagos. We begin our show with the Democratic debates. This week, millions of viewers tuned in for their first extended look at the crowded Democratic primary field. The debates featured 20 candidates split over 2 nights in Miami, Florida. Last night, Senator Kamala Harris attacked former Vice President Joe Biden for his comments on busing and working with segregationist senators. And on Wednesday, Senator Elizabeth Warren, who was the only candidate polling in double digits on stage, held strong in the first part of the debate. But many are calling former Mayor Julian Castro the breakout star of the first night. Joining me now is Joe Garofoli, senior political writer for the San Francisco Chronicle, and Los Angeles Times political writer Seema Mehta. She joins us from Skype from LA. Thanks for being here, you guys.
Great to be here.
Thank you.
So, much anticipated 2 nights of debates. We're going to get into some of the details of those heated exchanges in a moment. But first off, Seema, do you think the fundamental tenor of this race has changed in any way this week?
Absolutely. I mean, I think we saw some exchanges between these candidates, particularly between Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, that, this is a pivotal moment in the race. Do we know what the result's going to be? No. I mean, there's such a long time to go. We have more than 200 days until the Iowa caucuses, and then, there are many debates to come. So, I mean, did the last 2 nights determine anything? No. Did it, decide who the nominee is going to be? No. But I think when we look back at this race, these exchanges, particularly the really heated exchange between Kamala Harris and Joe Biden over race, it's going to be one of those pivot points in the race.
I mean, do you agree, Joe? I feel like there was very low expectations going into this in some ways, and it does seem like more happened, especially on the second night, than maybe we thought might.
Yeah, and I got a text from a political operative, former Chronicle colleague, who said Biden is aging in the ring as we speak. So this could be sort of what Seema alluded to. This could be the beginning of a tough spot for Biden. He has to defend a lot of the things he was opening up that were opened up Thursday night. Also on his age. Eric Swalwell, our very own congressman here in the East Bay, went at him on the age question.
I mean, I think that, Kamala Harris really had a standout night. Joe, you and I have followed her for a long time. Seema, so have you. The biggest moment was when she went after Joe Biden for his recent comments about working with those segregationist senators. Let's listen to part of that exchange.
We've also heard, and I'm going to now direct this at Vice President Biden, I do not believe you are a racist, but I also believe, and it's personal, and I was actually it was hurtful to hear you talk about the reputations of 2 United States senators who built their reputations and career on the segregation of race in this country.
Seema, I don't know, what do you think? I feel like this might be the best I've ever seen Kamala Harris.
Yeah, I mean, she definitely everyone declared her the winner of these 2 nights of debates. I mean, there's no question. She had such a breakthrough moment. And I think especially, voters, one of the things that voters are looking for is who can take on the president on the debate stage. And I think she earned a lot of points on that point last night. Also with Joe Biden, I mean, everyone knew that he was going to, he came into this as the front runner with the target on his back. And, when Swalwell went after him on the age thing, he sort of smiled and he brushed it off. But when Kamala went after him, I mean, his reaction was a little stilted, and it's been, the coverage of it has been continuing, all day today. So I think she scored major points last night.
Yeah, Joe, I mean, it was sort of both, right? It was the fact that Kamala Harris seemed so authentic and, clearly prepared, but also relaxed. Right. But then also that he didn't really seem to have a response for something he should have known was coming.
Yeah, the terrible debate preparation. And also she did something that was very unusual in that she was able to combine a very personal anecdote, her childhood in Berkeley, talking about race, which is very difficult to talk about, and then she went into prosecutor mode and said, "Do you still support busing?" So it was like all phases of Kamala, and this was, as you said, this was a Kamala that we did not see when she was running for AG, when she was running for Senate, and even when she was running for district attorney. We've watched her mature before our eyes.
All right, we're going to have to talk about the other candidates, but Seema, before we do, what do you think about how Joe Biden has dealt with this in the aftermath of the debate? We've seen, it seems like he's really digging in, and we haven't heard him apologize or find a way to kind of get past this issue, which quite frankly has really been brewing for more than a week since he made those comments.
Right. I mean, today you see the statements that he put out where he's saying, of course I believe the federal government should have a role in these things, and no, states can't just decide. It completely contradicts his record, first of all. Secondly, I mean, since, the new audio came out today from NPR, which I believe has him saying that he would support a constitutional amendment that to ban forced busing. So, I mean, this is not going away. And it seems like the proper answer would be, yes, I have a long career. A lot of things change over 40 years, and maybe he's changed his mind. But there's multiple records of him, whether it's writing letters to senators or this interview with NPR of the position that he had. So I don't understand how he is sticking in his heels, but he is.
All right, well, let's move on. There were 18 other candidates on stage. And, I think on the first night, as we mentioned earlier, Elizabeth Warren was really the one to watch. Yes. She really held her own. What impressed me on both nights about her and Sanders was how much they, as the progressive wing of this party, seem to be really pushing the debate. I mean, Joe, what do you make of that? Because there were more moderate candidates trying to push back a little, but it was kind of on the progressives' terms.
Absolutely. And I think someone who was cheering that it was on the progressive terms was President Trump, especially when they said, let's everyone put up your hand if you support giving health benefits to undocumented immigrants. Every hand went up.
On Thursday night.
On Thursday night. On the first night and the second night, who supports taking away private health insurance, which is not popular. Bernie and Kamala put their hands up. Second night, who was it? Warren and Bill de Blasio on the first night. Those Elizabeth Warren, if she's the nominee, just cut her first attack ad when she said, "I'm with Bernie." So that leftward lurch may work well in the primary. It may work well in California, but it may cause them problems in the general election.
Yeah, Seema, I'm curious what you think about this. I mean, what we're hearing, I think, from Republicans is that this is exactly what they want, that this is the socialist Democratic Party. But I think that there's obviously a lot of excitement around these candidates as well. So that's a balance that they're going to have to really sort of weigh in the coming months.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, clearly this will create excitement among one wing of the Democratic Party. But one of the things with Bernie Sanders last night, Savannah Guthrie pressed him on, will your health care plan, will it raise taxes on middle-class Americans? The first time she asked him, he didn't answer. The second time after she pressed him, he said, yeah, it will. And your health care costs will go down. Any politician, when you're admitting that your plan is going to cost middle-class taxpayers more money, I mean, that is clearly going to be in an attack ad somewhere along the way.
Yeah.
And the other thing, Bernie, when he was asked, how are you going to implement this if there's going to be a divided Congress? And he said, well, there's going to be a political revolution. Okay, but what if there isn't?
Right.
And then what do you do?
Yeah, for Medicare for All. Tens of millions of Americans are going to rise up. All right, well, let's talk about our other sort of hometown candidate, Eric Swalwell, congressman from the East Bay. He's been polling very low. This was really an opportunity for him to stand out. He came in with some zingers. He went after Biden for his age. He really talked strongly about guns. I don't see that this is going to change the race for him, Joe. Am I wrong?
And he used his zingers twice, too. He was like the reprise of his zinger about Biden being old. He basically took one for the team in terms of the other Democrats by raising the specter of Biden's age, which is very difficult to do.
Bernie Sanders later called ageism.
He called it ageism, and he said it depends on the virility of your ideas and that. I don't know if Swalwell stood out. And remember, in September, he's going to have twice as many donors, and he's have to poll 2%. It's going to be a challenge for him, and he better sharpen up his Swalwell for Congress signs.
All right, Seema, the other person that did break out, however, was Julian Castro from Texas. We really saw him go after some of the other folks on stage around immigration. I mean, do you think that this is, a little bit of gas for his campaign? Because he has been sort of somebody that is exciting some parts of the Democratic Party, but not getting that attention.
Absolutely. I mean, after Wednesday night, first of all, he went after his fellow Texan, Beto O'Rourke, and he got the better of him in that exchange over immigration. And he saw some excitement, some momentum after that debate. But the thing is, then we had Thursday night and the Kamala Biden show, and I have to think that just sort of took all the oxygen out of the room. So, if he had been maybe the second night, or if there was time between the two debates, I think he might have been able to better use whatever momentum he got.
Which speaks to how important it is how the lineup is the next time,
Right.
the next debates, right,
Sure.
which we're looking forward to in July. So quickly, Seema, and then Joe. Seema, do you expect, what do you expect next? What do you think is coming, given what we've seen in the past 2 nights?
Well, in terms of Biden, I expect a lot of opera research into his very, very long career. He was first elected before I was born. I think we're going to have a fundraising deadline coming up pretty soon, or disclosures coming up pretty soon, and that'll tell us a lot about how these candidates are doing and who has the resources to really go for the long haul versus who might have to make a sort of hard decision to get out. And then people are talking about the winnowing of the field, but I'm kind of skeptical that we're going to see that in the next 2 weeks or before Detroit, the debates in Detroit. But at some point, probably towards the end of the summer, I think people are going to have to make some decisions.
Yeah. Joe, who do you think has the most momentum, and do you think we'll see folks drop out in the coming weeks?
I think even overnight we're seeing some polls where Kamala Harris has a little bit of spike. We see fundraising has spiked for Julian Castro, and those two definitely have it. I think Warren is going to be definitely helped by this. I think Biden is you're going to see that big lead he has whittled down, and then the narrative becomes Biden's losing his lead, and then that kind of stuff feeds on itself, and who knows.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. Joe Garofoli from the Chronicle, Seema Mehta from the Los Angeles Times, thank you both for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now to immigration. A team of lawyers revealed shocking conditions at a border facility in Texas they visited last week, where hundreds of migrant children have been detained for weeks on end. The lawyers interviewed dozens of children there from ages 2 to 17. They reported seeing up to 50 children confined in a single room, with toddlers being cared for by older children. Many of them hadn't bathed and were wearing dirty clothes. Officials at the Health and Human Services Agency claim that they have run out of space at shelters designed to house unaccompanied minors. Also yesterday, the House passed a $4.6 billion border aid bill backed by the Senate, despite objections from some Democrats who said it lacked protections for migrants held in shelters. Joining me now to discuss this is University of San Francisco law professor Bill Ong-Hing, who visited the Border Patrol facility in Clint, Texas last week, and KQED News reporter Farida Jabala Romero. Thank you both for joining me. Bill, I want to start with you. As we just said, you were in Clint, Texas. You were one of the inspectors for plaintiffs in this Flores settlement, decades-old legal case, and it really requires certain conditions for children. Can you tell us a little bit about what you saw? Maybe pick a couple stories to tell us.
Well, I'll tell you, what I saw was heartbreaking. Children as young as 2 years old who were left to take care of themselves. They were confined to rooms sizes for 20 to 50 people. And you're right. The younger the child that I saw, the dirtier they were. I interviewed a 5-year-old and a 4-year-old. Their clothes were filthy. Their hair was dirty. And when I walked into a large conference room to use a printer, and one end of the room and another interviewer was interviewing a 7-year-old girl who started crying. And that interviewer walked her across the room to what I thought was maybe her mother, because there was another older teen with a 2-year-old in her lap. And that 7-year-old went over there to be comforted. I found out later on this teen was not a mother. The teen had just, out of the kindness of her heart, taken care of the 2-year-old and the 7-year-old, and they had bonded. It's unbelievable. I've been doing this work for decades, and I've never seen anything like this. And the fact that they were left to take care of themselves was just heart-wrenching.
Do you have any sense, I mean, we've heard stories that some of these kids maybe came across with an adult but were separated. Like, why are kids this young alone without a legal guardian or parent with them?
The administration is separating any child at the border who is coming with a non-parent. So the vast majority of kids that I interviewed came with their aunts and uncles or older siblings. And the policy that Trump administration is doing is, if you're not coming with their parents, you're going to be separated. So this 2-year-old, this 5-year-old I interviewed, they had come with an aunt and an uncle.
I can't imagine the trauma. I also understand that there were some infants there with their teen mothers. Is that right?
That's right. I interviewed 3 teen mothers with infants as young as 5 months old. 2 of the children had experienced diarrhea, vomiting, chills. They were rushed to the emergency room, and they stayed there for 3 or 4 days until they recovered. They were not sick when they arrived. They got sick on the premises.
Wow, just heartbreaking. Farida, you have been at our southern border in California reporting. What have you seen in terms of this surge of migrants and how things might be different or similar in California?
Well, what we know is that Customs and Border Protection especially, and this is something like the agency themselves will tell you, is they're not equipped or they're not resourced or designed to deal with the kinds of migrant flows that we're seeing these days compared to what we saw earlier, like in the 1990s or 2000s when it was mostly Mexican men coming to the U.S. looking for work. And now the change is mostly Central American families with children, and children, like Bill said, Professor Hing said, who come with relatives but are still separated because it's not their parents. And so what we're seeing is a lot of migrants that are just in border towns in Mexico, and the administration implementing this metering policy where they only allow a few people in at a time to request asylum, which is why we're seeing more people trying to cross the border between official ports of entry, and unfortunately seeing the cases of the deaths of
Like that
migrants.
heartbreaking photo of the father and the young child. I mean, to get to the point where you're trying to cross the Rio Grande with your 23-month-old kid, as that father was, where you're willing to go into these situations. I mean, they must be fleeing just heartbreaking situations. I mean, I know you've been in Central America. Frida, can you just explain to us briefly why people say that they're willing to take these risks?
Yeah, I mean, this is, like you said, a very dangerous trek that people in Central America are taking through Mexico. And if every, potential asylum seeker I've spoken on the Mexican side of the border says they're fleeing, crushing violence, extreme poverty, and impunity and corruption in the governments, because people don't even have the basic, they can't go to school, they can't go to work, they can't start a business.
And it's just hope that things will be better here.
Yes.
We have seen Congress this week attempt to respond. They passed this humanitarian aid bill. Quickly, Frida, what's in it? And then, Bill, I want to talk to you about whether you think it's going to make a difference.
So the bill that the Senate approved first and then the House approved just recently, it gives more about $800 million to expand the capacity of Customs and Border Protection to be able to handle the surge of migrants, and also gives money to Health and Human Services so that they can open up more space at shelters for kids that the government labels as unaccompanied minors, but really many of them came with relatives. There's also other provisions in there that sort of like scratch the surface of trying to get these agencies to meet their own standards they have already in the treatment of migrants. But of course it doesn't have as many restrictions as the House bill.
Yeah, and do you have, any confidence that this will make a difference for these children?
I don't. It's not addressing the problem. The problem is the separation of the kids at the border from their relatives. They don't need to be in detention in the first place. Yes, it's true that ORR is running out of bed space, but they're slow in processing those children that are in their detention and right now. And there's this term that's become pejorative, catch and release, but it worked before. It's you take them in, you process them, you send them on their way to wherever they're headed, San Francisco, Milwaukee, Chicago, and there was a 98% appearance rate. These folks are not absconding. They have every incentive to pursue their asylum claims.
Do you think that something will happen in the Flores case now that you guys have come back and are presenting this information to the court that could change the situation on the ground?
Well, I do. I think that given what we saw, children way beyond 72 hours, they were kept for 3 weeks.
And that was the agreement the government had made.
Exactly. That will end, I'm pretty confident, soon, within the next month, I hope. But what won't end is detention, because the money that the Senate and Congress appropriated yesterday is to build more bed space.
And Frida, given the fact that liberal Democrats are pretty angry over this compromise, do you think that this money this bill is sort of the end of the story in Congress for now? We've just seen them be it's such an intractable issue in D.C.
I don't think so. I think this was a lot of more liberal and the Hispanic caucus saw this bill as an opportunity to put more strings on that, on those funds that they're approving, like billions of dollars, right, for this aid. So I don't think it's going to be the last we'll hear of this. And I also wanted to point out that that some lawmakers, like California lawmakers, like Congresswoman So Lofgren, just introduced a bill yesterday to try to put more attention on the root causes of migration and what the U.S. Can do to try to slow down this flow of migrants in the countries, in the home countries, trying to address those very issues that are making people flee.
Clearly important to get to those root causes. Farida Jabala Romero, Bilong Hing, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yesterday, the Supreme Court ended its term with two big rulings that could affect elections and political representation for years to come. The court ruled 5-4 that federal courts cannot hear challenges to partisan gerrymandering, where a party in the majority draws voting district maps unfairly favoring their candidates. Also this week, Chief Justice Roberts sided with the court's liberal wing in rejecting the reason given by the Trump administration for adding a citizenship question to the U.S. Census form. Here now to talk about these big decisions is UC Hastings law professor Rory Little. Professor, thanks for joining us.
Happy to be here.
So let's talk first about the census ruling. Can the Trump administration now include or not include this question on the 2020 census?
So it's actually unclear because the court remanded this to the district court for further explanation from the Commerce Department as to why they want this question. I think as it stands right now, they could not print the forms with that question on it, but they're just not going to print the forms, and we're going to see what happens in the trial court. You may see some further action in the next couple weeks.
But the Trump administration's argument all along for asking the Supreme Court to weigh in this quickly was that they needed to start printing those forms by this coming Monday. Why do you think that they'll now delay that, and will that undercut their argument with the courts if they sort of do a reverse course on that?
It definitely undercuts their argument. I mean, the court yesterday said this is a pretext. The reason you gave is a pretext. It's not real. There's a disconnect between the evidence and what you said. So if they then say, well, actually, we don't need to print the forms on July 1st like we said we had to, that's going to further undercut it. On the other hand, President Trump has said, I'm asking them to delay. So we're going to see. There's probably a huge fight happening right now in the White House and the Solicitor General's office as to what to do to not further lose credibility, because they've got other cases out there pending, and they don't want to lose credibility on one and impact the others.
Well, one of those cases we're going to get to in a minute was gerrymandering. There was a trove of emails on a deceased GOP strategist hard drive that kind of played into both of these cases. That revealed the origins of the citizenship questions and sort of indicated that it was a political consideration. Do you think that influenced how this court ruled?
Well, they read the newspapers, and we know they read the newspapers. So they're not, they're human beings.
Right.
They didn't mention this at all, this further evidence that suggests that actually there was a racial motive, a biased motive to undercount Latinos and undocumented people. That evidence has come out in the last 30 days, but it wasn't mentioned in any court opinion. So Chief Justice Roberts, though, many people think may have changed his vote in the last 30 days. And so whether he mentions it or not, I think it has some impact.
Some impact. They do know what's going on in the real world, not just the courtroom. In this other gerrymandering case, the court said it basically could not overrule districts drawn by politicians for political purposes. Were you surprised by this ruling?
Well, I am very surprised by it and disappointed, right? And Justice Kagan in her dissent says, with respect, but also with deep sadness, I dissent. They said that they could review it, but they're not going to. They say it's a political question that is beyond their competence or beyond their proper role of authority, which is just not consistent with the last 60 years of jurisprudence. They review all sorts of questions that are difficult questions, sensitive questions. And to say that there's no standards to do gerrymandering when they already do racial gerrymandering, they said, well, we could still do racial gerrymandering.
So they did say that. I guess within that context, then, does this impact past court decisions around gerrymandering, or are we just talking about moving forward?
Well, I think it's not going to impact anything that's already final, but if there's any pending lawsuits, this is going to say those district courts have to dismiss it. They took these two cases from Maryland and North Carolina yesterday and ordered the district court in the proceedings below to dismiss those cases. So this impacts a lot of litigation. And by the way, these same states, Maryland and North Carolina, they could go back and start analyzing, well, was there actually a racial motive behind this?
So there could be further challenges based on these same exact districts.
I think there could be, and there have been in North Carolina over the last 20, 30 years. There have been other challenges based on race.
Now in California, we have an independent redistricting commission. So does this have any impact here?
Well, it doesn't have any direct impact because we do have this nonpartisan, commission that does the job for the last 20 years or so. But first of all, that could be repealed if one party ever decided they wanted to. And second of all, there's an indirect effect if other states are able to kind of gerrymander so that their legislatures are dramatically overpowered by one party. There's kind of a ripple effect, if you will, back to California.
Or what happens in Congress, obviously. I'm curious, we've been all watching Chief Justice Roberts pretty closely especially since Justice Kavanaugh was confirmed almost a year ago. What do these two rulings tell you about where he sits on the court, both in terms of the political divide, but also the considerations you think he's making as he looks at these legal questions?
Yeah, I have a lot of respect for Chief Justice Roberts. He is a conservative, there's no doubt about it, but he doesn't always play directly to that, band. So remember the health care decision, he was the vote that actually upheld Obamacare. They call it, some conservatives now call it Roberts Care. And this is another vote where he basically said, I'll go so far with the conservatives, but I'm not going to take a pretext reason in the census case. Now, in the gerrymandering, he said, you know what, we're just not going to get involved. So he's not a liberal, but he's the center justice in a 9-justice court, and he's exerting that authority in a way that I think is healthy for the institution.
Yeah, he seems to be very aware of what it means, sort of both politically and legally. Finally, this is the first term we've seen Justice Kavanaugh play into. He's obviously a very controversial figure on the left. What are your sort of takeaways from this first term for him?
Well, he voted most often with the Chief Justice. He voted with the Chief Justice more often than any other justice. That's pretty normal for your first term to just vote with the boss.
You want to impress the boss.
And the other is he's definitely conservative. He voted conservatively in a number of cases, but he also split with Gorsuch a couple of times. So they're not twins. They're not voting exactly the same. Gorsuch and Kavanaugh, the other new Trump nominee, Gorsuch. And he did a couple of opinions that were actually pretty liberal. The Flowers versus Mississippi, he ruled for a capital defendant, vacated the death penalty. So we'll have to see where Kavanaugh is going to end up. But I guess I'd say don't lose hope yet. People evolve.
All right, Rory Little, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
That'll do it for us. As always, you can find more of our coverage at kqed.org/newsroom. I'm Marisa Lagos. Thanks for joining us.